choosing happiness over other things that you might also want. Recognizing, in other words, that ultimately happiness is a more important goal for you. It certainly is for me, and it may not be for other people, but for those who want to really prioritize happiness, recognizing that we often sacrifice happiness for the sake of these other things that are less important than happiness, and not doing that mistake.
Welcome to Happiness for Humanity. I'm Rania Badreldin, the happiness consultant from Egypt. Join me and my guests for an hour of meaningful conversations for a happier world. Joining me today is Raj Raghunathan, Zale Centennial Professor of Business at the University of Texas at Austin. And we are here to talk about happiness. Raj, you're actually a professor of business, so some people might be wondering, what does that have to do with happiness? And for you, it has a lot to do with it, because that's a big interest of yours. I actually got to know you first when I took your Coursera course, A Life of Happiness and Fulfillment, which is one of Coursera's most popular courses. That was at the very beginning of my journey to make sense of happiness. And that was one of the courses I took, and I loved it. And then I got a chance to meet you in person. That was great. And here we are today. So thank you very much for joining me. And please let me know what got you on to this happiness journey and to teaching or even studying happiness in the first place.
Yeah, so it's a very important and interesting question. People don't usually associate, as you mentioned, happiness with the business school. And in my case, I've always been interested in the topic of happiness since I was a kid. And later on, I ended up in a business school, partly because I thought that the only way to make a living and earn money was to do something that is associated with making money, such as being in a business school or getting an engineering degree and so on. I didn't really think that there was any way in which happiness could be taught or could be researched or it could actually become a profession. But once I got into the business school and once I became a professor and I got tenure, I started kind of examining this assumption that you cannot teach happiness or, you cannot research happiness. And I decided that I was just going to take a step and put together a course on happiness and see if the students wanted it, see if the business school would approve it. And it ended up being the case that not only was there a huge amount of interest in the topic among the students, the dean's office approved the course. And so here I am. This was about 15 years ago, more than 15 years ago now, that I started putting the course together. And 15 years later, I have, as you mentioned, a Coursera course. I have a book. I have a TEDx course. I have a couple of TED Talks. So it's really kind of snowballed out of control in a very, very good way for me.
That's awesome. And I love that. I love that you, first of all, connected the two things and didn't just, stick with just the marketing and found a way. And probably you grew through that journey as well, I'm sure, because I'm sure, you learned a lot on the journey. Now, about your book, you mentioned the book. It's called, If You're So Happy, Why Aren't You? If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Happy, right?
Right.
And I was actually watching your TED Talk the other day, and it was about, I don't know what you called it, like the stupidest happiness mistake or something like that.
Yeah.
So can you just tell us a little bit, if you're going to share like some just nuggets, because this podcast, the point behind it is really to help people understand happiness in the first place, and then really figure out how to apply it to their lives. Because I really think the world could use a lot more happiness. And so, yeah, let me just get you to share with us, what do you mean by if you're so smart, why aren't you happy?
Yeah, so you would expect that smart people are good at achieving their goals. You might even consider that to be one of the definitions of a smart person. They understand cause-effect relationships and therefore are better able and more effective at achieving their goals. And given that happiness is one of our most important goals, we know this from a lot of research around the world, and of course, intuitively too. I think that most of your listeners, I suppose, would agree with the statement that happiness is one of our most important goals. You would expect that the really smart people, the smarter you are, the more effective you are at achieving this important goal of being happy. And yet we see that a lot of smart people, a lot of successful people aren't as happy as they could or should be. In fact, you might even say that in some instances, there's a negative correlation between being smarter and how happy you are. And so I thought it was a provocative title that if you're so smart, in other words, you should be good at achieving your goals and therefore good at being happy, then why aren't you happy, right? So it's addressing people who are smart, successful, intelligent, achievement oriented, go-getters, and yet they seem to have a gaping hole in terms of happiness. And so I wanted to target that audience, which tends to be
Which,
more of the business audience now, and I'm in a business school, right? And so it makes sense that I'm targeting that audience.
yeah, I mean, I totally relate because as an entrepreneur, so yeah, I was always rushing, and I appeared to be achieving a lot of success, and I certainly appeared to be smart, but the bottom line is I wasn't for a very long time. I wasn't happy, and so I was going about it the wrong way, and I was sort of chasing the wrong things, and yeah, so I totally relate to what you're saying. Whether it's people in who work even in large companies or people who are entrepreneurs. Actually, a lot of those people are unhappy because they're maybe just in the hustle kind of culture. They're not slowing down and breathing and enjoying life. Did you find that you had that? I mean, is that a personal experience as well that you learned from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do
Yeah.
think that I
Okay.
also went through a phase in my life just before I started offering this course, in which even though I had a lot of things going for me, so for example, I had tenure. I don't know if your listeners are aware of this concept called tenure. Once you get tenure at a university, you have job for the rest of your life. You cannot get fired. So even though I had tenure, I had good health, a great family, etc. I wasn't as happy as I thought I would be having all these achievements. In fact, I went through a pretty low period at one point, and I started to kind of re-examine my priorities, my decisions, my choices, my way of living my life. And so there was definitely an element of self-relevance or personal relevance of the topic of happiness for me, which is why I put the course together as well. Partly that was a big reason for why I put the course together.
And what are the things that you've noticed and actually changed, or what are the new things that you started doing? Well, are you happier now, first of all?
Yeah, I do think that I'm happier now and more stably happier now than I was before.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Right.
And
So what did you
so
do?
yeah, so I try and follow my own advice, so to speak, right? If you read my book, I talk about 7 different sins that we tend to commit and 7 different habits that if we acquire these habits, then we are more likely to be happy. And so the stupidest happiness mistake that you mentioned a couple of
Yes.
minutes ago, I try and avoid doing that, which is, what is the mistake? The mistake is to know what is going to make you happy and yet not choose to do it, right?
Right.
So sometimes it's very clear that getting into an argument with somebody is not really going to end up well, right? But just to satisfy your ego, you might want to get into an argument and win the argument, so to speak. But really, there's no winners in that argument. Both of you end up escalating it and becoming increasingly angry, and that then weighs on your mind, and you don't get good sleep, etc. So that's one. Sometimes it's got to do with focusing on longer term happiness, even if it comes at a little bit of a pain in the short term. So, for example, going and working out at the gym or eating healthy food, etc. So, acquiring a set of habits that reliably, more consistently put you on a more happy ground, right? So, that is one thing that I do a little bit differently than I used to before. I also focus on relationships, right? I think that having a set of healthy relationships is very important. And oftentimes those relationships don't just fall into your lap. You have to invest in them. You have to carve out time for them. And you have to be supportive of people, even if you feel like they're being a little bit irritating to you right now, right? Just kind of like be a bigger person in the situation. So that trying to kind of choose things that I find intrinsically motivating, as opposed to kind of focusing on making money or becoming famous or achieving status and so on and so forth. Mindfulness and meditation is another one. So there's just a bunch of little things that each of them probably only contribute, 1 to 2% increase in your happiness, but together, I think that they account for quite a significant jump in your happiness.
That's great. I mean, to summarize what you said, so you have knowing what you want and actually going for it, and then longer term happiness goals, and then all the little things that actually add up. I mean, that's sort of, and that's a really good thing to keep in mind. I think some people need to take a step back and actually figure out what they want first, because maybe we say that quite easily, just, well, it's a stupid mistake. Know what you want and just do it. But maybe you don't know what you want. And so if somebody's listening and they don't know what they want.
There's a subtle difference. It's not exactly knowing what you want and doing it. It's like knowing what is going to make you happy and doing that. Choosing happiness over, say, value for money or being right or, proving to another person that you're a better person, etc. So it's choosing happiness over other things that you might also want. Recognizing, in other words, that ultimately happiness is a more important goal for you. It certainly is for me, and it may not be for other people, but for those who want to really prioritize happiness, recognizing that we often sacrifice happiness for the sake of these other things that are less important than happiness, and not doing that mistake. That's what I mean.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes absolute sense, because also sometimes you know what's going to make you happy, but maybe you're afraid to take the move because you're not sure, because it's not. So that goes back to the idea of comfort and going out of your comfort zone and just, doing it anyway. I mean, going for it. So I think some people maybe hesitate to do that. So this is kind of like to encourage people, like if you know something that's going to make you happier, just go for that. So that makes absolute sense. In this case, though, how are you actually defining happiness? Because there are so many definitions of happiness out there, and some of them are, thinking about some of the definitions, I mean, are like happiness is just like a fleeting emotion. And I'm pretty sure that's not how you're defining it at all. It's a much broader definition. So how would you, if you were to sort of define it, how would you define it?
Yeah, it's certainly not just pleasure in my definition, and not just my definition. I think that most people, if you ask them, what do you include under this term happiness, I think that they would say that it's not just pleasure, it's also positive emotions such as being in love and feeling proud about having done something that you didn't think you could achieve. It's about feeling a sense of gratefulness and awe and having a sense of serenity or tranquility. All of these things are included under happiness. And also, I think very important for us as human beings, happiness includes the sense of fulfillment that comes from doing something that you find intrinsically motivating, and also the sense of meaning that we get from helping other people out. And so, you can think about happiness as a very broad term that captures a lot of things under it. And I just use happiness as a shorthand for referring to all of those things. And I think most people intuitively do that too. So some people, if they equate happiness to only short-term pleasure or fleeting emotions, then I understand that. And I would then say that, okay, the way that you're defining happiness is different a little bit from how I'm defining it. And so how about we use a different term, like, for example, a sense of fulfillment or a sense of meaning or just positivity, right? Feeling positive, feeling like you're in a mental state where you're optimistic and resilient and hopeful and energetic and enthusiastic and want to face up to the challenges that life is throwing at you, and feeling capable and confident about addressing those challenges. That mental state is what I'm calling happiness.
Okay, yes. What about, that's really interesting, because you mentioned the challenges, or you mentioned sort of the harder times. So during those times, are we still happy? And do they also fall under the happiness umbrella, or during those times we're now unhappy? Do you see what I mean?
So I would say that they could fall under the umbrella. I think a lot of it has to do with your perspective on them. If you think of these challenges as things that you feel capable of handling, and also have the view that these challenges are going to help you improve in one way or the other, help you become a better person at the other end of the challenge, or a more skilled person at the other end of the challenge, etc. In other words, if you kind of like think about the, I don't know, we can call it a metaphor, but imagine that you're somebody who's very good at tennis, right? And you wake up in the morning after a good night's sleep, and you have a nice healthy breakfast, and the sun is shining, it's a beautiful day, and you have a worthy opponent to play the game of tennis with, right? A lot of us would think that that is a nice situation to be in. Yeah, I'd love to go and exercise myself, and I'm good at playing this game, and I have an opponent that's going to challenge me a little bit. And at the end, I may win or I may lose, but in the process of playing the game, I'll find something interesting and engaging to do with my life, right? So I would consider that to be a happy state. And so even though there's a challenge, there is a recognition of difficulty. I think the problem, Rania, becomes when you have a challenge, but part of you is like, or even the whole of you is not wanting to engage with that challenge. You think that that's too big a challenge, or it's too overwhelming for you, or it's not the kind of challenge that you want to take on. It's boring, or it's distracting from what you really want to do in life. Those kinds of situations, I would say, are unhappy situations. But otherwise, if you're okay with the challenge and you think that it's actually going to help you become a better person or make life more interesting for you, then I would say that that's a happy state.
I agree. You said so many things that got me thinking. So let me mention them. Okay, so one of them, and that's really important, is you mentioned, I don't know how you said it actually, but you mentioned actually enjoying the game itself. So you're basically enjoying the journey itself.
And yeah, the process.
So that's really
not
important.
Focusing on the outcome. Yeah, not focusing so much on the outcome, but living it
So then so you're not attached to the outcome. You're actually enjoying the process itself, or the tennis game itself, or whatever. So that's a really important one. And this is one of the things that I found difficult. So I came across this happiness definition once when I was taking my NLP and hypnotherapy course, and the definition was, the happiness is to follow your highest excitement with integrity and with zero attachment or expectation of the outcome. And when I first heard that, I was like, okay, I can get the first part, fine. So I'm going to figure out what's exciting me, what's motivating me now, what seems like something I want to work on, what's purposeful or meaningful, and I'll do it with integrity. So I'll be true to myself, I'll be true to my values, okay? But then that last one was like, okay, so irrespective of what happens, I'm sort of going to go with it and adapt. So that was harder, and it took time, but I keep repeating that to myself. And that's exactly what you gave with the example. We've got to be actually enjoying the challenge or the journey itself, and knowing that the journey is going to have challenges, and then not be attached. So you're basically like enjoying the tennis game, right? So I think that's really powerful, and it's important to remember. And then you mentioned something else. You talked about the challenge itself. Now, if things are too challenging, they become stressful and overwhelming. And if they're not challenging enough, they're boring. And I think that reminded me of the concept of flow, because when you're in flow, you basically, you've sort of balanced the challenge with your skills, right? And that's kind of like, if we stay within that area where we're using our skills in a way that does challenge us, but does not overwhelm us, and we're doing something meaningful and fulfilling to us, then I think we keep that happy state irrespective of what's happening outside us. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree. I mean, you said if we keep it at that state, I don't know if we have control over that, right? Sometimes, despite our best attempts to keep our challenges in that zone, it can get more challenging or boring. I think boredom is less of a emotion that many people experience these days because of all the distractions and social media and devices and all that. But we certainly experience a lot of situations in which we are more stressed than we would like to be, I think. And so it's not entirely in our control. Suddenly you might get into an accident, for example, or receive a diagnosis, a medical diagnosis that you did not weren't mentally prepared for, or a breakup might happen in your life, etc. And so you do your best to kind of keep the challenges to within your flow zone. And when situations become more challenging than you would like, then recognize that this is an opportunity to up your skills a little bit, so that your available ability, so to speak, to handle the challenges is getting higher and is commensurate with the amount of ability that's required of you by the challenging situation. That might mean that you go on a more healthy diet, or that you prioritize your self-care and get a good night's sleep, or maybe get a therapist, just to kind of like deal with the situation mentally, etc. So you try to keep it in the zone, but the point is that it may not always be in the zone, as we know, especially if you've
absolutely. Yeah, of course.
lived 25, 30 years or more, you know that life has its ups and downs. It's impossible to keep it in your zone all the time.
No, absolutely. I totally agree. I think I just meant to have more times of flow, as many as we can, as much as we can. But no, I totally agree. I mean, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I don't want people listening to think that even if we work on this, that we're going to always be in flow and that we're always going to wake up super excited and thriving. And of course not. I mean, yes, things are going to sometimes happen around us that are going to make us sad, or of course, and that's part of being a human being. So yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that. Definitely, happiness is not going to be about feeling good all the time. It's not going to be about fully engaging with life and applying all our skills in every single minute. Sometimes it's just not going to be like that. And yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that during those times, maybe those are the times to slow down, take care of ourselves, like you said, our sleep, our diet, those things. Because of course, yeah, and also you mentioned, the term under our control. That's an important thing to talk about as well. Of course, not everything's under our control. So, there's stuff that's just going to happen, and then there's stuff that's within the realm of our control. And yeah, I mean, what do you think about that? I would say we just focus on the things we can control, and then the other things, we just have to figure out how we're going to look at those things, and then what do we want to do about them. If there's something we can do, we do it, and if there isn't, we kind of shift our focus back to what we can control. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think it does sound right. It actually kind of like also gets us a little bit into some philosophical territory of what exactly do we control. I think that if it's like a relatively small task we want to accomplish, that's in the immediate future, like for example, if I want to scratch my nose, I have control over it, right? But when it gets to be a task that's more complex and other people are involved, and especially if it's farther away in time, then we have less and less control over those things. If I want to throw a party this evening and I want to make sure that everybody really enjoys this party, I think I have much less control over it than, scratching my nose right now. And so I think that it's very important to realize, your kind of sphere of influence, so to speak, and recognize that as soon as it becomes more complex and it's farther away in time, you have less and less control. One thing that we do have more control over is how we interpret things, and how we choose to see things. And even in the situation in which things are not in our zone, things are more challenging than we would have liked, and we are feeling stressed out, I think that we can always bring a perspective of, hey, you know what, at the end of the day, the situation that I'm in right now, I'm still lucky enough to have the things that I have going for me. Maybe it's your good health. Maybe it's access to resources that you're not on the streets. Maybe it's some cherished relationships that you have. Maybe it's the fact that you're not in a war-struck zone right now. Think about what's happening in Israel and Palestine right now, right? Or in other parts of the world. And so you can always kind of look at your glass as being half full in, I would say, almost any situation, even if things are very much out of control. And so I think that perspective and gaining that perspective is a little bit in your control, more in your control than is the actual external outcome. And so in that sense, I would agree with your statement that, focus on the things that you can control, focus on the narrative, focus on building a narrative that is going to be more productive for making you experience a more positive, more optimistic emotional states. Because at the end of the day, being in an optimistic, resilient, positive emotional state is almost always better than to feel depressed and feel like you don't have any control and feel like there's nothing to live for, etc. And so I think that building that ability to maintain a positive state is a very, very important skill that is largely in our control. And that's what I would focus on.
Yeah, and maybe some of the things you mentioned, like meditation or mindfulness, that can, and just stopping and breathing, can help if you're feeling like your emotional state is heightened, you're anxious or whatever. Just maybe stop and breathe and slowly and deeply, and or just get up and move. Sometimes like doing the opposite of whatever you're doing now. So get up and go outside and run or whatever you want to do. Connecting with nature, you mentioned that. You mentioned relationships. I think those are the things that it's kind of the tools and the things we have up our sleeve when we're kind of feeling our worst. I used to struggle though with emotions, and I used to kind of like just pretend they don't exist. And so we don't want to be like pretending they don't exist. They exist, and so sometimes we're just going to have to just feel them, and the only way through them is to feel them. At the same time, if you don't necessarily want to sit there and feel them the whole day on your own, so sometimes you just need, get out, meet somebody, and do something different. I'm saying this because I've been feeling that the last few days as well, and I noticed what worked, and I noticed myself sort of getting more, more and more sad if I was just on my own, going over the same thoughts continuously. So our thoughts, of course, are so important. So yeah, I'm just trying to share some things for whoever's listening. But you've already you've given so much advice or just tips in terms of what works. The concept of awe, you mentioned awe very quickly, but that's something people aren't used to. And I learned that as well from one of the courses that I took. But just to appreciate, just to step outside and just pick one thing. It could be a leaf on a tree or just something, and just look at that and appreciate how that's something pretty magnificent, or just look at the mountain or look at the sea and just feel like you're part of something bigger. These things help as well. I mean, they also get us out of, well, they keep us in the moment, but maybe they get us out of a cycle of negative thoughts, I would say.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree a lot with a lot of things that you're saying. I think with some of these things, if you force yourself to do them, they turn out to be pretty good at getting you to be centered, feel more equanimous, feel less negative. Like, for example, for me, almost every time I go for a run, I at the end of the run, I feel better. I feel better at the end of exercising in general. I also tend to feel better if I talk to certain people about problems that I have. They tend to have a more broad perspective on things. They have had enough life experiences and wisdom that they kind of can predict how something is going to go. And in general, when you're in an emotional moment, you tend to kind of think the worst. And so hearing somebody kind of tell you that, hey, you know what, this is going to pass. Don't worry about this. This is not something that you need to spend a lot of time stressing out about. 2 months from now, I can guarantee you are not going to be thinking of this, right? So hearing that is very, very important. The one practice that I think is difficult to do and feel that it's effective when you do it, when you're stressed out, is mindfulness. I think that mindfulness is a practice that, at least for me, I need to have practiced it when things are going well for me in my life. So I can't wait until things are really bad and then say, okay, I'm going to kind of breathe or just like calm down, etc. It doesn't really work for me. So I need to have practiced it consistently, regularly, on a sustained basis, on an everyday basis. And then when negative things do happen, the intensity of the negativity is a little bit lower in the moment. And also I'm able to have the mental control needed in order to sit and meditate and focus on my breathing, for example, right? Otherwise, what happens is I tend to kind of sit down, but I ruminate rather than meditate. I'm thinking of the problem rather than kind of taking my mind away from the problem, which makes it even worse at the end of it. Like you were saying, sometimes, you kind of like go walk. I mean, it's better than just sitting, because when you sit, you're actually not meditating. You're thinking you're meditating, but you're actually ruminating. So it's an important thing to understand.
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned that. These practices might work for some people and they may not work for others in the same way. And I think it's important to remember that. Even something like journaling, some people like to journal, it works for them. And for some people, it just doesn't work for them. So one can really pick what works for them and apply it to their lives. For example, with meditation, you use it more as a preventative thing and you don't use it at the time of stress. And that's what works for you, which I totally understand. I understand what you mean by that, because if it's going to just make you ruminate, then what's the point? So yeah, thanks for mentioning that. And something else as well that I wanted to get your opinion about is the connection between happiness and success. So people used to think that success leads to happiness. And now it's much more about what I hear and what I believe also from personal experience is that happiness leads to success, not vice versa. Is that what you believe? Is that what you found too?
I haven't directly
Yeah.
done a lot of research on this, but I know of the research that already exists. And that research does suggest that the direction of causality is stronger when it goes from happiness to success rather than the reverse direction of causality. And to many people, it's a little bit surprising because they can think of people who are really miserable or very driven to such an extent that they sacrifice their health and relationships and everything, and so therefore are miserable and they end up succeeding. And so they kind of arrive at this conclusion that in order to be successful, you need to be mean or you need to be unhappy or stressed out or anxious. That's what kind of makes you successful. But if you kind of look at the research as to why it is that happier people are more successful, then you discover certain things that seem very intuitive. So, for example, if you're happier, you're healthier. And especially in the long run, like, 20, 30, 40-year career, being healthier makes, a difference because you're going to show up for work more often. You're not going to take as much sick leave, right? You're going to be more focused on the task at hand rather than, feel this pain or physical discomfort or some ailment that you need to kind of take care of. Likewise, if you're happier, you're going to be more collegial. And most of us in this day and age are working in jobs that require cooperation of other people to help us succeed. And so if you're a happier person, you're going to elicit that cooperation a little bit more because you're going to be better in terms of your relationships when you're happier. That also most people find intuitive. And also, and this may be a little bit non-intuitive, just the way the brain works. When you're happier, you're more creative, you're more subtle in how you make your decisions. You don't think in black or white. You're better at thinking through, okay, when do I say what to whom? And you take context into account rather than just blurt out whatever it is that you're feeling. And so if you put all of this into, take all of this into account, happier people are healthier, they show up for work more often. Happier people are better in relationships, so they're more collegial and better at teamwork. Happier people are more creative, more objective, more subtle in their decision making. Then the obvious conclusion is that happier people are going to be better, especially in the long run, in terms of achieving success. And that's in fact what's been shown. So the happiest 20% of the workforce, for example, in one study, they found that they're 32%, they're earning 32% more salary than the least happy 20%, right? So that's a big effect. And other studies have replicated the same finding. And so at an abstract level, some people find it surprising that happier people are more successful. But if you break it down into why happier people are more successful, it starts to make sense.
Absolutely. And I think that's why we see so much more emphasis now, finally, on happiness at work, for example. So many companies
Exactly.
are actually taking that seriously. I see chief happiness officers, and that's obviously because it has a positive impact on their bottom line, right? And I think
Exactly.
you do some happiness at work related things. What do you
Yes.
do? Do you give talks or what is it?
Yeah, I do. I conduct talks, I conduct workshops. I have, a course on edX, which is another platform like Coursera for MOOCs, on the relationship between happier employees and financial success of the organization. I have some data that I've collected over many organizations over the past 4 years, and all of it points in that same direction. It replicates this finding that's been established in the research that happier employees, happier organizations are more successful, especially in the long run.
And what's it called? What's that course called?
Oh, that's called Happier Employees and Return on Investment course, or
Okay,
HEROIC for short.
Yeah. Okay, so if we have any business owners or CEOs here listening in, that's a good course, because the thing is, I mean, I think it boils down to people do better when they feel better. So if you really want to bring out the best in your employees, they'll be more creative, they'll be more innovative, you'll have a nicer work culture. If they're treated well, if they're respected, and so I love seeing that. I actually love And this is pretty new, I think. I mean, this hasn't been more than maybe 10 years or something like
Yeah,
that.
maybe 20
the
years.
emphasis on happiness at
Yeah.
work.
I think that there were
Yeah.
pockets of people even before that maybe recognized it or thought this is the right thing to do, to increase and enhance the well-being of your employees, right? But I think this research on this is definitely new. And I think that the kind of more awareness of this relationship between happiness and success is also relatively new. And, certainly since I started teaching the course, I've seen an upward trend in the number of organizations that are interested in the topic and want me to come and speak, for example, or want people like you to come and do a consulting gig, etc. So it's a good space to get into, by the way. I mean, for some of your listeners who are thinking about, what do I do with my career? One of the exciting prospects is to try and enhance the happiness of organizations and be a consultant, for example, a happiness consultant, or even a life coach, right? I think it's a very good job to have.
It is. I agree. And maybe if anybody's listening, consider that because, well, first of all, it helps other people be happier, which is lovely. So that's fulfilling. And it actually, it helps the speaker as well, the person giving the talk or the workshop. It's really nice because I think we feed off this energy as well, So I think
not
it
just
is.
Yeah, and also you have a little bit of a gentle, nice pressure on you to follow the advice that you're giving to other people, right? For example, if you're saying that, hey, in order to be a leader that promotes happiness, you need to really care about whoever's reporting to you and tackle their problems and help them address their problems rather than just give them challenges and leave it up to them to solve it. Then you have to, as a person who's saying that, also do the same thing, right? So there's a little bit of that gentle pressure that you put on yourself to also do the things that you preach, and that of course increases your happiness, as it should, because that's what the research says, right? So I think there's a lot of positive benefits that come to you personally as well, apart from being fulfilling in terms of what you mentioned, which is helping other people out.
Yes, you're right, because inevitably we're affected by the situations and the surroundings that we're in. And even from the perspective of affirmations to ourselves, as we teach things, we're also affirming them to ourselves. So yeah, it does affect us. This is why I'm doing this. I enjoy it, and I think you're absolutely right. It picks me up as well. I mean, even just launching this podcast and then getting today on this call with you, it was exciting. And today was a better day. And as a result, the rest of the day will be better as well. Because I did something that was meaningful to me. And I think it's win-win. So thank you so much. Is there anything else now that you'd like to share with whoever's listening or watching us today?
Not really. I think that you got me to talk about a set of topics that are very important. And it's also, I should congratulate you on being a very good interviewer. Even though you say this is, early days for you, you're very good at this because it's very organic. You cover a lot of ground, but in a way that's not seemingly pre-planned or artificial, so that's a good talent to have.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, one thought that maybe, I've just been thinking about this topic in the recent past, that I think might be an interesting one for your audience is to think about how to increase your happiness in small ways throughout your day, right? Rather than kind of think about something that, is going to increase your happiness in a big way. Like, for example, get a great job or do something tremendously helpful to somebody else, or find a life partner that's your soulmate, etc., or buy your dream house, right? I mean, all of those things are great, but those are by definition not going to happen that frequently and are, of course, difficult to control, not in your control entirely. So if you think about small ways of increasing happiness on a day-to-day basis, on a moment-to-moment basis, I think that logically it makes sense that if you have a lot of things that you like to do, so you just have a long list of likes. Like, for example, you like to play with a dog, or you like to go on a walk, or you like to watch TV serials, or you love what you do for your work, right? You like to take a massage, you like to take a nice shower, or get a good massage. There's just a lot of things that you like. You like Mexican food and Egyptian food, and most people would love food from the Mediterranean. I think it's just delicious. But if you just have a long list of likes, then no matter what life throws at you, you're probably going to enjoy it. But if you have a long list of dislikes, then you're obviously setting yourself up for a lot of unhappiness, because you're going to not like many things that are happening. You go out on a walk and suddenly it starts to rain, and then you'd be like, oh, I'm like really unhappy now, right? Or a dog barks at you, then you're really unhappy because you're afraid of dogs, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, if you go on a walk and it starts to rain and you say, hey, you know what? The weather's like warm enough that I like this. It's nice to feel the rain in your face. Why not, right? Why should we have this assumption that, when you go out and it rains and you get soaked, it's a bad thing? In fact, if you see some Indian movies, they're shot in the rain because, people like that somehow in India. And so the idea is to grow your list of likes and shrink your list of dislikes. And there are some strategies that you can do in order to kind of do this. One of them is to just expose yourself to more and more stimuli in your life. Expose yourself to different diverse cultures, different kinds of foods, different kinds of music. And over time, we have the ability to start to like things that we're exposed to more. It's called the mere exposure effect. So that's one strategy that you can follow. You can also follow some other strategies. So, for example, you can acquire a level of skill that helps you get into flow states. So, for example, right now, if you're indifferent to playing Sudoku or doing crossword puzzles or playing chess or playing tennis, anytime you get an opportunity to do these things, just learn a little bit and then try and practice a little bit so that you have a little more skill. And then once you do have a medium level of skill, then you get into these flow states that make it more enjoyable. So there's just a lot of things that you can do in order to increase your list of likes and shrink your list of dislikes. And once you do that, then every day becomes a little more pleasurable, a little more like happy pockets that you can collect. And that, I think, is a relatively low-hanging fruit and an easy way to enhance your overall happiness on a day-to-day basis. So I'd like to share
I love
that.
it. I love this idea of this list. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. It's a great idea. And actually, it can be written out. I don't know if that's what you meant. Just is it in your head, or you're actually writing it out?
You can write it out too. I think that would be nice to maintain a list too, a list of likes and dislikes, and then
It
over
reminds
time.
me of like over 20 years ago, and when I used to get depressed a lot, and then I decided at some point I had this term called copeability. I mean, it's not a word. I don't think it's a word, but it's my ability to cope. And I used to feel like I'm unable to cope. So I had this little list of things that I enjoy, and I would put it in my wallet. And that was kind of like for my copeability. Whenever I feel like I'm just unable. The idea was that I turned to my list. Now, to be honest, I didn't always turn to my list when I needed it the most. And because I was just too down to go to the list. And so I think it's fantastic idea to actually, do a list. Like if we're going to leave the audience with something practical, just, start a list, maybe start the list today. And even if you have a list of dislikes, maybe start that list as well. But then maybe after a while, you can move the dislikes to the likes by kind of starting to see what's nice about the rain instead of, and so on. And then actually use the list. Like don't fall into the mistake that I made, which is to not use it. Like use it. Like it can have music and nature. It can have, a nice drink that you like, herbal tea or whatever. It can have so much on it. And I think we forget those things. And I think we forget them the most when we need them the most. So if they're maybe in front of us, it could even be like a screensaver on your mobile, or it could be on your fridge or whatever. It's a lovely idea. I mean, I love it. And I also love what you said about just little day-to-day tasks. It reminded me of the concept of purpose. And some people really get stuck with, but what's my purpose? I don't have a big life purpose. And sometimes it's more important to have just purposeful things that you do in the day. I mean, they're just little tiny things, but you're doing them because they mean something to you. And that's really even more important than one huge, grand purpose, right?
100%,
and I wanted to ask you about your balloon analogy, because I remember it from the course, but I don't remember it very well. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's a simple idea. Basically, the idea is can happiness be measured, and do people know how happy they are? And what the research shows is that yes, the simplest way to measure happiness is to ask people how happy they are, and that measurement turns out to be quite reliable and valid because if you look at more quote unquote objective measures of happiness, like for example, levels of serotonin or dopamine in the bloodstream, they're highly correlated with people's self-reported happiness levels. So I came up with this balloon analogy, which is the idea that happiness is like a balloon. Basically, it's a balloon that you're carrying around with you, and you know how big the balloon is, and other people can see it too. Usually, people can tell if somebody is a happy person or not in the moment. They're smiling more, or they're just more chilled out. They're not as focused on themselves. They're not complaining as much, etc. And even the body language, you can make out who's happy and who's not. So happiness is like a balloon. Everybody can see it. You can see it. And the bigger the balloon, the happier you are. And then I extended the analogy to talk about how these happiness sins that we commit are like little holes on the balloon. They keep letting the air out. If you're chasing superiority, for example, or if you're overly control seeking, or if you're so addicted to your mind that you can't stop thinking. All of these are happiness sins, and they leak air out of the balloon, making the balloon smaller. And these happiness habits are like these little pumps that are pumping air into the balloon. That's where it gets a little bit weird because we don't usually look at balloons and have pumps coming with them. But you can think of the habits as happiness pumps, and these pumps are pumping air into the balloon. And so the more happiness habits you have, the higher the chance that the balloon is going to be bigger. So that is basically the balloon analogy.
Yeah. Which I mean, it makes sense. So basically, we want to be doing as much as we can of those happiness boosting practices as we go along, so that we're constantly filling up our balloon. And then when some air comes out of a balloon here and there, at least we have enough air going in constantly.
Exactly.
Which is why we want to make a lot of those things part of our daily lives. I mean, not all of them, obviously. We're not expecting people to all the time be going out in nature and exercising, but yeah, little things here and there that you infuse into your day-to-day life so that you fill your balloon, so that you can actually be okay with the occasional holes here and there. It's not gonna be empty. It's you'll be able to fill it up again. So I really love that analogy as well, and I just wanted to share it with the audience because by the way, when we fill up balloons here in Egypt, maybe those are the helium ones, but they actually use a pump. So to me, when when you said that, it made sense to me. It wasn't very weird.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah. This has been so educational and so much fun for me, and I know it's going to be valuable for the people listening in. So I really appreciate everything you shared today, and just taking the time out of your day. And we're in totally different time zones, but I'm glad it worked out in the end. And thank you so much for coming on. And maybe we can, down the line, even do it again and talk about another happiness-related topic.
Perfect. Yeah, I'd love to do that. Thank you also, Rania, for your patience as well. I know that I logged on a little bit later than originally planned, and you've been a very charming and gracious host. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. Join me every other Thursday for a new one. Happiness for Humanity is available on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms. If you found this episode valuable, please share it. Let's come together for a happier world.